I think we can get started since it's 10:30 now and we'll let others roll in. Hi everyone, welcome to Sologic's RCA webinar. Today we have Katie, our instructor, discussing an example problem that we've just published on our website. If you haven't already, feel free to go on to sologic.com. Under resources, I will just post a link for everyone's convenience. The case study has, or the example problem has already been published, so it'll be easier for you to follow along as well. I'm Michelle, I'm the business development specialist, and I'll be moderating this webinar, so feel free to ask questions in the chat or QA, and I'll help interfere as needed.
Thank you, Michelle. Well, again, hello to everyone. I just want to take a moment to introduce myself. Thank you so much for joining us today. I've been with Sologic for just over a year, but I've been working in root cause analysis for nearly a decade. I started as an environmental compliance specialist in oil and gas, and I eventually moved into a full-time RCA gig consulting across multiple industries. And so now I get to share those experiences teaching others how to lead effective investigations and solve complex problems. So that is what we are going to do today, is we're going to take I won't quite say a deep dive. We've just got an hour, but we're going to dive into this helicopter crash and figure out how in the world this could happen. But first, just a little bit more about us. Sologic, we are a company that provides RCA training and software to help organizations solve problems and reduce risk. And so you'll get to catch a glimpse of our software as I walk through this example problem, and you'll get to see our methodology in action. And so our methodology, which is a 5-step process, it works on all different kinds and sizes of problems. And we just want to let you know that we've worked across many different sectors and industries, from farming to petrochemical, manufacturing to aerospace technology to brewing beer, from simple little problems or even near misses to very complex black swan events. And so here you can see some of the organizations we work with. It's a pretty varied list, but they all have one thing in common. They are all working to get better at solving problems, and we are helping them do that. So I'm guessing most of you are familiar with our 5-step process, but here it is. It's a very easy to follow 5-step method to conduct an RCA investigation. So again, I'm going to bring these steps to life with our example problem. And so if you know just even a little bit about this example problem, the big question is, how did a trained and experienced helicopter pilot accidentally collide with mountain terrain? And so we're going to use this process to find out. And with that, we will just jump right in. So what we know, a good problem statement, which is step 2 of our process, sets the foundation for the event. And so there's several components of a complete problem statement. We like to establish, when did this event happen? Where did it happen? This can include the geographic location as well as the facility or equipment, component, system information. And then one of the other components of the problem statement is, what were the results of the problem, or what were the impacts? How bad were they? And unfortunately, in this case, the results are pretty bad. We did have 7 fatalities, which is everyone on board. And so there was 1 helicopter pilot and 6 passengers. So again, we can find out this problem occurred on December 26, 2019 at approximately 4:57 p.m. This happened on, is that Kauai? I'm not sure actually how to say or pronounce the name of this island, but this happened on one of the islands of Hawaii near Waimea Canyon. I also might be saying that a little wrong. There's a lot of vowels involved. This occurred with an Airbus AS350B2 helicopter. That is the make and model information. And then the unique helicopter ID is N985SA. And again, we had 7 fatalities, and unfortunately that was the pilot and the 6 passengers. And I do just want to point out that all of the information that I am going to reveal to you is through the National Transportation Safety Board official report. Sologic did not investigate this event. The only information I have is what's publicly available through that NTSB report. And we do have a link to that report on our website if you'd like to go through and read the 100+ pages. But one of the benefits of CauseLink and our method is that we take those very large reports and we can boil them down into the most basic information so that you get a clear picture of what happened, how and why it happened, and what will be done to prevent it from happening again. You're going to find this out in an hour through a PowerPoint and looking at a chart in CauseLink instead of reading that large report. But if you want to, it is there. So again, this is just a quick glimpse of basic elements of the problem statement. Next, we're going to look at a quick timeline of events. Often what I like to do is build a timeline even before I get into the chart, because I just like to mentally know the story. And so when we build a timeline, we generally look at it in chronological order because that's the way most of us tell a story. And so what we know on the day of the event is that basically before 6:45, the pilot arrives to work pretty early. At 7 o'clock, they check and they print the weather information. At 8:25, the first of 8 scheduled 50-minute tours depart. And then basically throughout the morning, this pilot completes 4 consecutive tours as planned. The pilot stops and has lunch, about 1 hour. And then before 4 o'clock, so after lunch, the pilot continues and takes 3 more tours or leads 3 more tours. And then the pilot starts the 4th tour in the afternoon, which is the accident tour. And that begins around 6 or 4:31 in the afternoon. And then again, approximately 20-something minutes later, the helicopter encounters adverse weather and then eventually, unfortunately, crashes into the side of a hill. And so again, this kind of just lays out that story of what happened. This doesn't actually explain how or why it happened. It just gives us that chronological order or the sequence of events. To add to this, here's just 2 images. Again, these came from the NTSB report, but in this top left image, you'll see the overall path or the path that we should have taken. So here is the airport over here on the east side of the island. This is the start stop. I traced the path in red just so you can see they get going. This is all the normal route. And then we go through Waimea Canyon. And then it's when we pop out of Waimea Canyon, which I'm going to jump down. There's a zoomed in on the bottom right. So we come out of that Waimea Canyon. The yellow is where the tour should have gone. This is the normal route. And then what we find is that the accident veered off of the normal route, or the helicopter veered off at some point. And then this is the accident site over here, again, in the side of a mountain. If you read that full report, then you'll also know there was a witness. It's not an actual eye witness. I guess they were more like a ear witness, if that's a thing. But there was a person hiking in the woods, in the mountains over here, and they heard the helicopter and what we presume to be the helicopter crash. And so this was the approximate site, the approximate location of that witness compared to where that accident occurred. So this is just some basic information. Again, I like to kind of set this stuff up because this is the what happened and where did it happen. And then we're going to jump into how and why it happened. And so I know that you can't read the details of this chart, but I did just want to show you what the chart looks like from a zoomed out, kind of that 30,000-foot level. This chart was built in our software, CauseLink. And so we use CauseLink to build a cause and effect diagram. And there's a few benefits that I want to share with you of building a chart. For one, when you're actually facilitating an RCA, by building a chart live in front of people, it keeps your audience engaged. You're doing something together or you're building something together. Very similar to when you're putting together a puzzle, you are all working on this thing collectively. Additionally, and as I alluded to earlier, by building this chart, you are simplifying complex data. And so it allows viewers, which is you guys in this particular case, to quickly grasp patterns, trends, and relationships. So again, you can read a whole report. Things are organized in paragraphs, full sentences, and it's not always easy to see, oh, what's related? Okay, well, these two things, these two causes had to happen together at the same time to produce this effect. And so to me, it's kind of like a family tree. You can go to a family reunion, and if you have a large family, there may be 50 people out at some park, having a picnic, but you don't know how everybody's related. Well, again, you'll have that family tree with the relationship between parents, children, grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins, etc. And this cause and effect chart is kind of like that. It organizes these causes into branches so that you can see what causes are related and then what causes led to this event, but they're not in the same branch. And so it's more like, distant cousins 3 times removed or whatever. And then last, the chart actually can enhance memory retention. So again, you can read a 100-page report. Some people are much better at remembering details when they read long reports, but a lot of us aren't necessarily. When we look at a chart or a graph, our memory is or that information gets seared into our memory by seeing it in that visual form as opposed to reading paragraphs. And so again, people just tend to remember visual information better than text, especially when you participated in building it. So you guys can let me know in the chat, but as an audience, you can tell me right now, I'm curious, would you rather spend 20, 30 minutes looking at this chart very carefully, or would you rather spend 20 or 30 minutes reading a 100+ page National Transportation Safety Board report? Let us know in the chat what you would rather do, and then Michelle, let me know what folks say. But with that, we will jump into the chart. So let me pull this across. I'm actually going to stop sharing for just a moment so I can change screens. All right, so here we are. Now, what we start with is our focal point. And so that is the cause on the left side of the chart. So again, when we look at this impact, yes, we lost a helicopter, and that is going to cost a lot of money for the tour company to replace that helicopter. But we did have a safety incident. And so again, we had fatalities. That is going to take a higher priority as a focal point. And so we're going to start here with this effect or the focal point. We had 7 fatalities. And then we want to ask, what caused this? Well, the answers are a helicopter struck terrain and there were 7 people on board. Again, the pilot plus his 6 passengers. And so these 2 causes work together to produce this effect, the 7 fatalities. Now in CauseLink, we are able to end branches. And so in this particular case, I'm not going to continue asking why questions or what caused this when it comes to the 7 people on board the helicopter. They were there, they were paying customers. This is, what we call the desired state. We're probably not going to find solutions to change this. Like, we're not going to stop doing helicopter tours with people in an effort to stop fatalities. We're going to focus our resources, our effort, our solutions somewhere else. And yes, I am reading your comment. Julie, wouldn't you also need sufficient force to cause the fatalities? Absolutely. Yes. I thought about this earlier, so we could, and I don't even mind adding this on the fly.
And we have another question. Do we know how long the pilot experienced bad weather prior to the crash?
Yes, and we will get into that. So when we start asking how and why the helicopter struck terrain, we're going to get into that weather pattern and how things changed. As far as the sufficient force goes, again, in the National Transportation Safety Board's report, they did not uncover excessive speed, excuse me, or excessive elevation. And so that's not something I included here because they didn't focus their recommendations and solutions on anything that would have changed that sufficient force. So you're absolutely correct. And then here, I would probably actually terminate this with other causal paths more productive because it would come into play the distance between where the helicopter was and the terrain, their speed, the overall like weight of the helicopter. But again, the National Transportation Safety Board did not find any causes that they could change in the future to change that sufficient force so that you would get or that you would negate fatalities. So where we're going to focus our efforts is this helicopter striking the terrain. And so now this cause becomes the effect, and we're going to ask the question, what caused this? And the answer is the pilot is unaware of the proximity to the terrain. And if you go through and read the report, I guess the aviation industry calls this spatial disorientation, which in normal people's language, that just means the helicopter was not aware of how close they were to the side of the mountain. Now, we have to ask the question, which is Sologic's question number 2 in our chart building 2-question process. Question number 1 is what caused this, which you've heard me say a few times. Question number 2 is every time this cause occurs, does it always result in this effect? So every time the pilot is unaware of the proximity to the terrain, does it always result in the helicopter striking terrain? Well, the true answer is no. We also have to have this mountainous terrain present and a helicopter used for tours. Now, in these 2 cases, this is almost like saying oxygen is required for a fire. Yes, it is absolutely a true statement. I call these kind of the duh causes, but occasionally these duh causes or these obvious causes lead to solutions. And so we like to get in the habit of capturing these causes, even if they don't go anywhere. Again, mountainous terrain, we can't do anything about this. This is out of our control. We're not going to level the mountain. So we end it. Again, this is the desired state. This is probably part of the reason why we're doing a helicopter tour in this area is because it's beautiful. And then helicopters used for tours. Well, there may be other types of tours, canopy tours, horseback riding tours, hiking tours, whatever. But in this particular case, this is the mode of business. It's a helicopter tour business. And so again, we end this branch with desired state. So the bigger question now becomes, why was this helicopter pilot unaware of the proximity to the terrain? And so just one quick detour, haha, pun intended, for CauseLink is we can roll up causes. We can compress them because I want to limit the information that I show as I unroll this cause chart to you. So as I go through, I'm just going to double click and then it'll expose more causes. So what we have here is what caused the pilot to be unaware of the helicopter's terrain. The pilot was unable to see the terrain, and this pilot entered an area of deteriorating weather conditions. So here you can see there's one more cause. Why are we unable to see the terrain? Because there's dense fog and deteriorating weather present. And then again, now we're going to take a deeper look at why did we enter deteriorating weather conditions. At first glance, what we have is an atypical weather pattern emerged, and the tour started and the tour continued. So the reason these are here, these again are kind of the duh causes, but there are opportunities here. Now, according to the weather report, which is actually shown up here, but according to the weather report that the pilot pulled at the airport before he left, the weather conditions were I'm going to air quote, deemed safe to start your tour. And so this is why, again, the tour started because it was deemed safe. Why was it deemed safe? What caused it to be deemed safe? Available weather report conditions were safe to fly, and there was no risk identified or flagged in the pre-flight checklist. So this is why the helicopter pilot took off. Now, the other question is, why did we continue? Because at some point, those weather conditions changed. And so we ask, why did we continue? Well, we are, and when I say we, I always use the terms we. I'm meaning the collective we, me, the pilot, the people, the folks on the ground, just the collective we. We're unaware of actual real-time weather conditions in this area. And there was either ineffective hazard identification of dense clouds and low visibility, or there is ineffective hazard mitigation of those. And so this could be an and or an and or. And so first we have to identify hazards, and then we have to effectively mitigate them. But if we never identify them to begin with, we can't mitigate them. But similarly, we can identify them, but then ineffectively mitigate them. So these are some slight nuanced differences. At the end of the day, we may not know, because the people who know the answer to this question, or the one person is no longer with us to help us understand what went wrong. But let's take a deeper look. So again, according to NTSB, why were we unaware of the actual real-time weather conditions? Now, there's quite a few answers here. There's no weather stations in the area. Hawaii has a very mountainous terrain, and so weather conditions can actually be quite different from canyon to canyon. And so why are there no weather stations in this particular area? Again, remote terrain and rugged terrain. I personally have never been to Hawaii. I've watched several TV shows or movies that's set in Hawaii, and it's very steep, very rugged terrain. Additionally, there was no onboard helicopter safety features that detect meteorological conditions. At this point, that's standard for helicopters. They are relying on those weather reports at the airport to give the go, no go for the flight. There's also no process for support staff to monitor and communicate weather conditions. Now that leaves me asking why. Even though we do say there's no weather stations in this area, could there be an area for improvement so that somebody on the ground is monitoring changing weather conditions and communicating them to the pilot? We do have an atypical weather pattern that emerged. So when we ask what caused this, well, when we just simply look at what is atypical, well, the normal weather pattern is a northeast trade wind, and the actual weather pattern on this particular day came from the west. And so that might have been one of the causes that led to an error of judgment that prevented us from turning around. So again, these are all the causes that led to the tour continued. What this is saying, the opposite of this cause is basically that in a perfect scenario with hindsight, we would have hoped that that pilot would have recognized changing weather conditions and turned around, done something differently than continue on that path. But again, most folks expect normal patterns, and this particular weather pattern was not normal. And then this pilot is actually unable to receive updated and accurate weather information while in flight. When we ask what caused this, the radar is unable to monitor this area. And that's because, again, the high mountainous terrain blocks the radar coverage less than 5,000 feet, which is where they were. And so if we look at these together, there's no weather station on the ground, and radar can't determine the weather conditions in this area. All 5 of these things together, these 5 causes together, are why we're unaware of actual real-time weather conditions. So then let's take a closer look at this ineffective hazard identification. Again, this is because there is no cue-based weather training. And so again, this is very specific National Transportation Safety Board language. We can get into this in a little bit, but I think if I understand correctly, cue-based weather would be looking around you, looking for those cues that weather is changing or that it may be hazardous, we should not enter. And so one of the findings that the NTSB uncovered is that there's no cue-based weather training, and again, this atypical weather pattern emerged. And so these 2 things together led to ineffective hazard identification. So then why was this not mitigated? And it's actually for the same cause, no cue-based weather training. So if you're in CAUSELINK, if you're not familiar, these light bulbs mean that a solution is attached to this cause. And in fact, the programming for this particular CAUSELINK application that I'm in, we have several. The yellow causes, you may be wondering why these are yellow, and you'll see that the yellow causes also have the light bulbs, which means they have solutions. So we just have color coding programmed that if there's a solution on a cause, it turns yellow. And then this little piece of paper next to the light bulb, I can't get too close, otherwise it wants or it thinks I'm trying to add a cause, but this little piece of paper shows that there's evidence. So we can take a peek at that evidence. I'm just going to open this evidence box, and then we can look. All right, so here's the definition of evidence. Cue-based training is designed to improve pilots' ability to accurately assess and respond to hazardous weather conditions during flight. This type of training involves the use of environmental cues to help pilots recognize when weather conditions are deteriorating and to make appropriate in-flight decisions. So again, that comes directly from the NTSB report. So any questions so far? Did I answer that other question?
We have one person saying the cause beyond 7 people on board may be 7 people is max capacity for helicopter design. It would matter if the max number of passengers allowed on board would be 6 people. Them asking why of 7 people would be worth pursuing.
I totally agree. I totally agree. Good call. So if we continue down, I'm just going to take a peek at our solutions. And so again, none of these solutions came from Sologic, but these are the recommendations from the National Transportation Safety Board. And so the first one is to install the necessary infrastructure in Hawaii to enable continuous radio communication between pilots of low-flying tour flights and ground support personnel along the most heavily trafficked air tour routes. So some of these, and we actually go through this more specifically in the written report on our website, but the recommendations from the NTSB, some are directed at the helicopter tour company, some are directed at the state and local agencies. And so this is one that may be more towards the state and local agencies.
And we had another feedback on the cause and effect chart.
Okay.
Typically, if there's an existing cause on the map, we'll use the connect to cause. The software creates a little blue bubble showing you a common cause. If you see a lot of those bubbles, that is a productive place for solution.
Yep, agreed. And so I'm guessing you're seeing this because we have no cue-based weather up here and no cue-based weather training down here. Under most circumstances, I will use the connect to. However, if there's no causes behind it, because we don't know the reasons why there's no cue-based training. If there's no branch behind it, I actually will just retype the cause. Myself, that is just a Katie thing. You can, and I'm just going to show this real quick. So I'm going to, let's see, I'll show you for demonstration, this connect to, and then we have no cue-based. So I'm going to just start typing that cause, and then I can click it, and it shows it connects to A. And now right now, A is out of my field of vision with the chart. So if I actually click on this, it'll zoom to where A is. Here's A right above it. So I totally agree with you though, as well. If you had a bunch of connect to no cue-based weather training, and so let's say you had, like you said, these little blue bubbles. So if you saw a bunch of like A, B, C all over the chart, what that's telling you is that this cause led to multiple effects and, and therefore spending resources on solutions that will control or mitigate this particular cause would be very much in our benefit. Let me hop to that report since I'm going to wait for this page to come back up. So let's open this. Oops, sorry, and you will just have to put in your information if you want to take a look at our report. This isn't the NTSB report, but just Sologic's report. What am I doing? Sologic. Business email. All right. And so that's going to download it, and then we will take a peek at it. So we were looking at solutions. I'm going to make this real big for us. All right. So again, This solution was to install the necessary infrastructure in Hawaii to enable continuous radio communication. I believe I actually have a better view of solutions up here, because then you can see which ones, yeah. So to the tour operator, these are the recommendations. Encourage air tour operators to establish safety assurance processes that routinely review recorded onboard videos and ADS-B flight tracking data to identify and address risky weather-related operational trends. So this is kind of having like a after review to look at those conditions and talk about, it's kind of like the Monday armchair quarterbacking, I think, where they review the videos and they watch their game from the week prior and they say, okay, maybe we won, maybe we lost, but like, let's break down these plays. What could we do differently? What could we improve on? Also looking at what went really well. So let's replicate that. Let's do that again. One of the other recommendations is share the details of this accident with other tour operators and the broader air tour community. So again, sharing these lessons learned so that other companies, other pilots don't have to learn mistakes on their own. Hopefully, they could use the lessons learned from this very tragic incident to make adjustments in their day-to-day operations. And then the third, we can promote the use of available helicopter safety technologies that mitigate the risk of inadvertent entry into instrument meteorological conditions, otherwise known as IMC, and encourage voluntary integration of such features into helicopter fleets. So there is technology out there, but it's not required. And so the NTSB is making a recommendation to incorporate this volunteer technology. So to the vertical aviation safety team, which, gosh, I forgot now, I read this report a while ago, but I'm guessing this is more of like a oversight organization. So include helicopter safety features for preventing IMC-related accidents in the proposed helicopter safety rating system. So again, I think this goes back to the helicopter itself, and maybe incorporating this technology into newer helicopters. And then last, they actually had quite a few recommendations for the FAA itself. And so this is where install the infrastructure, which happened to be the first solution on the chart that we were looking at, or in the COSLINK file. But for this one, we've got install infrastructure to enable continuous radio communication. We've got improve the ADS-B infrastructure to ensure full coverage for low-flying tour aircraft. I get the sense that there's a lot of these tours that occur. There's a lot of different tour companies and there's a lot of different tour routes. So it's not just this one. If you implement this solution, you will probably reduce the risk for many. Probably, oh man, I don't know, at least hundreds, if not thousands of passengers on a day-to-day business opportunity in Hawaii. So then also we could require tour operators to employ trained flight support personnel to assist with operational control, pre-flight risk analysis, weather briefing, flight monitoring, and hazard communication. So again, this would be the folks on the ground, but require tour operators to employ these trained flight personnel. Next, improve surveillance of air tour operations using data comparisons and periodic video reviews. So this is similar to one of the ones earlier, but this is saying to the FAA, improve this surveillance of air tour operations, whereas that other solution that was very similar was directly to the tour company itself saying, hey, maybe we should do these debriefs, look at the videos. And then last recommendation is to publish and maintain guidance on helicopter models with available weather and terrain related safety features and promote retrofit options for those not yet equipped. So these all just came from NTSB. These are their recommendations. Ultimately, it's up to each one of these companies or agencies to adopt and implement these recommendations if they decide to carry it forward. As far as Sologic goes, though, we want to take a broader look at context and ask ourselves what's normal, and then these hypothetical questions to explore. These are things that we would want to ask. Again, unfortunately, we were not asked to investigate this ourselves, so our knowledge of the cause and effect analysis only goes so far what the NTSB provided. But if we were to be able to get our hands in there and look around, we would want to know, like, what visual cues do pilots rely on? I'm sure you guys are thinking the same thing as me, like clouds, weather. I don't know if they have like anemometers, the wind speed recorders on helicopters. I'm really not sure. But what visual cues? Because we talk about this cue-based training, but what visual cues are the pilots relying on, and how consistent are they in Hawaii's terrain? We'd want to dig in a little deeper there. Additionally, are there subtle pressures or economic or cultural to not cancel or return flights? I don't know. I mean, maybe not a helicopter, but I know for myself when I've gone on, I don't know, horseback riding tours or something, it's rain or shine, but the risk is a lot lower. So we would want to dig in here with these more, like, these are the human and organizational performance type causes and I guess systems that we'd want to look at. And then our route adjustments expected or maybe even discouraged during practice. Again, these are some of the questions we'd want to talk to, not just the pilot involved, but we'd want to talk to other pilots to get a sense of what's the norm, what kind of cultural context exists. So when it comes to the limitations in weather and communication infrastructure, what we know to be normal is that there are these gaps in radar and communication. They exist below 5,000 feet. That is normal. Many tour helicopters lack this real-time onboard weather instrumentation, and the ground-based support is limited. So we know that's normal. What we would want to find out is then, how do pilots compensate for these blind spots? Could better ground pilot weather coordination reduce risk? And how would we accomplish that? And then how much do radar limitations affect decision-making confidence? And so if you don't have the actual data, the radar or the weather reports from the ground, how much do those limitations affect you as an individual? Your perceived benefits, your perceived risk with going forward. And then one more topic here, tour duration and route commitment. So we know what's normal is that these scenic tours are scheduled really tightly timed. I think the tours were like 50 minutes and they're almost booked like on the hour. I might have those times slightly wrong, but they are booked back to back to back. They do 8 of these in an operational day. Passengers and companies have high expectations for a full experience, and familiarity with routes can lead to strong confidence and judgment, rightfully so. I know when I drive the same path every day, I used to be a raft guide, so I would take folks down in a whitewater raft down these rapids, and I knew my routes very well. I knew my lines, as we called them, and that definitely gave me strong confidence. I'm not saying this is a bad thing at all. This is totally normal. However, we do want to ask these contextual questions. So is there implicit pressure to complete the tour regardless of changes? That's something we'd want to talk with folks. In the case of whitewater rafting, there is no turning around. Once you get going down the river, that's it. You either pull to the side and wait. You could send folks to hike out of wherever area you're in and tie the raft up. But once you've committed, you're in it. The next question is there a routine review of borderline weather flights? So maybe you get through it okay, but you come back and say, man, I really wasn't comfortable. I really wasn't sure, but do we review these weather patterns or the flight routes? And then last, are operators able to detect slow shifts in risk tolerance? So again, that is, if you're taking the same line every single day, clouds are rolling in, do we get used to it? That normalization of a deviation. Is our risk coming down because we do it every day or every week and nothing bad happens? So these last questions, these are also Sologic. We thought of these are not part of the NTSB, but again, we just wanted to share some of that human and organizational performance type philosophies that if we could get our hands on this, we'd want to dig a little deeper. These are the different things that we'd want to find out. So any other questions or any other comments?
Any other interests in going through any idea or suggestions for a new example problem? Please feel free to suggest as well. But granted, they have to have publicly available information.
Yeah, that is right. Sorry, let me grab, I'm gonna stop this and grab my slideshow because we've got just a little bit more. Which is actually just what Michelle just said. So yeah, if you guys do have any ideas, if you've been on any of my webinars in the past, you know that I love, in a weird way, but I kind of like these larger public transportation accidents. I don't love the accidents. I like digging in and figuring out what happened because we hear a lot on the news. This Washington, D.C., this is the one that just happened in January. As soon as I hear this headline, I'm like, okay, what really happened? Because what we hear in headlines, the news, it's often very incomplete. And I just start to wonder what else. I actually wonder question number 2, every time this thing happens, does it always result in this effect? So what else had to be present? Why was this helicopter and this plane at the same place at the same time? We will find out, and they are doing their investigation. Similarly, this Francis Scott Key Bridge strike that occurred last year, about a little more than a year ago. So these are some that I'm working on, and hopefully we will do webinars sometime this year when we get these wrapped up. The DC plane crash, we do not have the final report. Francis Scott Key Bridge, I'll have to look. So a lot of times NTSB will put out a preliminary report, and we can even start our investigation based on that preliminary report and then maybe come back later and finish it up. And then this last one is just something that I am personally interested in. I lived in Durango, Colorado for a number of years, and I actually lived in Durango when this occurred, but a old mine adit, and an adit is just an opening to a mine in the side of a mountain, but a mine adit collapsed, allowing for 3 million gallons of toxic mine fluid to be released and flow down the Animas River, which flows through the middle of town in August, when there's a lot of people who use that river for recreation, tubing, kayaking, etc. There are several Native American tribes downstream that use that water to irrigate their crops and water livestock. And so this had a huge impact on the area. So something else I'm working on, I think we're going to try to release it in August of this year at the 10-year anniversary. So that'll kind of be fun. But if you guys ever see anything in the news, any current events that you're like, I want Katie and Sologic to dig in here and tell me what happened, I'm happy to do it. I always find it fascinating. Just know that I am not a private investigator. And so I, like you, am going to have to rely on publicly available information, which there may not always be a lot of in the beginning. One other event that I'm really interested in, but I'm having a hard time finding information about, is the astronauts stuck in space last year. How did that happen? Why did that happen? How did that happen? What went wrong? That was a pretty crazy turn of events. But unfortunately, I'm not finding a public report. So if anybody has any leads on any publicly available information about that, I would love to get my hands on anything written so I can do an example problem about that. But as of right now, there's a lot of news coverage, but there's no official government report that I can use. And I tend not to use news coverage because that's not coming from an official source. So yeah, that brings our webinar to a conclusion for the helicopter, but let me know, again, do any questions remain? At the end of the day, we started a tour, we continued a tour, and at some point we encountered bad weather, and unfortunately, the risk was either not identified or not effectively mitigated to prevent the collision with the terrain. At some point, that pilot became disoriented and collided with the side of the mountain.
If we have no further question, I just wanted to highlight that we have upcoming public courses in mid of June, June 17 to 18. We have our in-person public course at Gonzales, Louisiana. 18 to and 19 to 20, we have level 2 master at Gonzales, Louisiana as well. So if you're available and want to advance your journey, we are hosting in-person courses back to back. Then, of course, we have our virtual session available in July from 15 to 16. That's our RCA specialist. Feel free to email me or Katie if you have any follow-up feedback or discussions. But thank you so much for attending the seminar.
Yep. Thank you very much.